because today is August 19th, and we're on episode 9 of our Common Latin curriculum, and I'm just so excited that everybody's here. Kathy and Jen, you do an amazing job of leading us through just the basics, and I can't wait to hear what questions people have. So I hope there's some other moms that are really amazing in pronunciation like we had last week.
I know we had some fun participation last time. So yeah, as you said, Leigh, we are on episode 9. How did that happen already? Just like we're at the end of August almost, same way. So we did, for those of you who have missed some of the episodes, in the first 7, we did the vision of the grammar strand, and then we spent 1 episode on each of the 6 tasks that students and families are going to do in the Common Latin curriculum. And then, just as a reminder, because we're going to memorize those tasks, they are read the Vulgate, recite the catechism, memorize vocabulary, practice forms, study syntax, and parse and translate verses. I did not look at the screen. Yay, I have them memorized. So we're all working on that. And then last week we did our first Tour 1 lesson by looking at the Tour 1 syntax page for Lesson 1 in Common Latin and looking at the I am verses that occur in Scripture, both in the Old and New Testament. And so we did go through the idea of the present system of sum esse. So we can probably all, since we can't recite in unison, we'll have to recite silently. But if I said to you, what is the present system of sum esse? You could say present tense, sum est, sumus estis sunt. And then imperfect tense, eram, eras, erat, eramus, eratus, erant. And then future tense, ero, eris, erit, eramus, eritus, erant. And then if we were in community, you would do that 2 more times. Or if you're around your dining room table, do it 3 times, the magic number 3. So today we're going to move on from our I am verses and sum esse into lesson 2, which is first declension nouns. And so Kathy, we will let you be our parent teacher here.
Yes, I'm happy to do that. So lesson 2 is on first declension nouns. The introductory, somebody's not mute. There we go. Okay, so the introductory paragraph reads, this week's lesson is focused on first declension nouns. A noun names a person, place, thing, activity, or idea. Latin nouns have the attributes of declension, gender, number, and case. A Latin noun can have a gender of masculine, feminine, or neuter. It can have a number of singular or plural. A Latin noun also has a case that shows the noun's role in a sentence.
Yes, and I love thinking about nouns. So some of you have learned in Essentials that we get our word noun from nomen, or names. And I know, Leigh, that you have spent a lot of time with us lately thinking about the idea of nouns and our first of the 15 skills, which is naming like Adam. So you want to talk to us about the importance of naming?
Yeah, it's part of the New Habits book. We have a big section that Jennifer's team wrote with a lot of suggestions that aren't mine. So that's really wonderful to have that occur. And so, naming, of course, a reminder, Adam starts with that. Or God asked Adam to name the animals. All the genealogies are names. We even get the privilege of knowing Joseph and Mary's genealogy and the names of their parents and grandparents. And it made me think of something culturally that's going on with the breakdown of the family and why it's even more important. Less than 20% of people alive know their great grandparents' names. So there's 8 people. And so when I read that, I went and wrote mine down, and I only knew 2 of them. So I immediately called the people that are alive and said, tell me their names before this is all forgotten. And so that's just one more indication of the breakdown of the family, that we don't even know the names of our relatives. And so it's very important to know how to name things. And of course, nouns are one of those things that every language uses.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. It makes us think of how important it was to record names in the old family Bible and why people did that. That's, nouns and the names for things are such an important part of relationship. And so even though we're going to study the practical aspects of nouns today. We always like to be thinking about that vision of without names, we could not have our communities and we couldn't communicate with one another. So super important. So Kathy, are you going to start us? I'm going to guess that you're going to start us in task 1, read the Vulgate. We're very repetitive here.
Yes, you sound like you have those 6 tasks memorized really well, Jennifer. Right. Okay, so task one is read the Vulgate. And so let me read this to you. In principio creavit Deus caelum et terram, terra autem erat dianis et vacua, et tenebrae erat super faciem, abyssi et spiritus Dei ferebatur super aquas. And I want to ask first, does anybody want to try to read that or even a portion of that? Just raise your hand or jump on the mic. Anybody want to try? I see no takers, and that's okay. That's okay. If I were doing this at home, I would have some of my students, maybe I had a foundation student, I might have them read the first 2 words in principio because they've recited that in cycle 3 with the John 1:1 passage. And then I might have, maybe if I had a challenge A student, I might have them read or try to read out loud one part of the verse, maybe just verse 1. We would listen, we would read, and just practice doing it. And the pronunciation is going to be kind of wonky at first, isn't it? And then we get better and better the more we do. So the first thing I would ask everybody, though, is what do you recognize from this verse? Oh, I missed seeing a hand go up. And who is that?
It's Yating. Yeah.
Yeah, good. Jump on. Do you want to read it?
To do this. This is our first time in the book club, and she wants to do it. You want to do it?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
In principio creavit Deus caelum et terram, terra autem erat annis et vacua, et tenebrae erant super faciem abyssi, et spiritus Dei ferbatur super aqua.
Very nice. Very good job. That was excellent. Thanks for doing that. Really nice. You may have noticed that, I don't know if you can see my cursor, you have this funky symbol right here where the A and the E are squished together. That's called a ligature, and it represents a diphthong. A diphthong is where 2 vowels make the same sound. So we would say caelum, and we see it again in Tenebrae. It's like the word I. So, yeah, but you did a great job on that. Super good. All right. So what does anybody recognize? Go ahead and raise your hand, or you could even type in the chat too. We can watch the chat. Anybody? Yeah. Michelle.
In the beginning, God created the earth.
Yeah, he did create that. He created the heaven and the earth. Yeah. So some of you may even know this, have Genesis 1 memorized, and so you can automatically figure out some of it. But of course, we're really just focusing on reading and just a few little things that you might recognize from earlier studies. So very good. Very good. By the way, task 1 for lesson 2, the students are assigned 2 chapters. Well, the curriculum for that lesson assigns 2 chapters of Genesis. Most of the subsequent weeks are going to have 4 chapters in whichever book we're in. We do not expect a Tour 1 student to read a whole chapter. We would probably park on something this long. You know, this is just 2 verses. We may park on this the whole week and just practice reading it over and over. And then each year through the curriculum, each tour, you would do more and more and more. Good. Another hand went up. Go ahead,
Stephanie.
Yeah, so just based on some of our earlier book clubs, Deus is there. And then I'm seeing the accusative singular ending on some words. And of course, the fun super. The kids will be like, yeah, I see super in there. And aquas might be familiar because of water. So
yeah,
those.
Yeah, good. So we're already recognizing some things. Good. So remember, we're not translating, we're listening, we're reading aloud, we're gleaning what we can, we're seeing what we recognize. And then we are ready to move on after that. But Leigh, do you have anything that you'd like to share?
I want to try. So
Okay.
I like that I see another dei, like deus, but what's really standing out to me is how many feminine endings there are with the terram and the terra and aqua and aquas. So the ending with the A's is starting to stick out to me.
That's a really good observation. And we're going to get to that pretty soon with the other tasks, aren't we? Good. Okay, so we're going to move on to task 2 now. And for this lesson, it's Recite Catechism. Catechism question 2 is, what are the attributes of Latin nouns? It's really nice that this catechism question ties in directly to the first lesson on nouns. And Latin nouns have 4 attributes: declension, gender, number, and case. We talked about that a little bit in the introduction: declension, gender, number, and case. And Jennifer, I know you've talked about before how important these catechism questions can be, even for older students. But do you want to tell a story about?
So over and over the years, I've worked with different ages of Latin students in our CC communities, and we would put something on the board, and then they would get stuck on a word. And I would say, okay, well, what part of speech is it? And they would say noun. And then I would say, well, what do we know about nouns? And then there would be silence. So I love having this catechism question because I kept turning around to them and saying, they have declension and gender and number, case. We have G and C as a little mnemonic device. And so I love that we're going to have this. So when they get stuck, it kind of reminds me of when they're older in math and you put a problem on the board and, you know, my kiddos at home would look at it and I would say, well, first of all, what are you doing? what kind of a graph are you drawing? They always, the older they get and the more complex things get, they need to go back to the basics. And so we would always have to review, like, this is a word I've never seen before in Latin, and we need to go back to what we know in the basics. They have gender, number, case, and declension. So.
Yeah, very good, very good. Does anybody have any questions before we move on to our next task? All right, I think we're good to go. Catechism is pretty straightforward, but very important. Okay, task 3 is memorize vocabulary. And remember, we're always going to read the vocabulary aloud before we write anything down. So this one is aqua, aquae, and you see the F is feminine, and it means water. Terra, terrae, feminine, earth or land. So we're just going to focus on 2 words today out of the whole list. There's a list of about 6 first declension nouns in this lesson, and so we're focusing on these 2. But one of the things that we need to notice, we haven't done nouns yet, and one of the things we need to notice is that there are 4 pieces of information for each of these entries. So you see aqua is the nominative form. Aquae is the genitive form, singular, genitive singular form. We see a gender. These are all labeled as feminine, and we have the meaning. And so what you would do then is the next step after you've read through the list is to go ahead and make vocabulary cards. And we're encouraging students to create their own vocabulary cards because the act of writing, we've talked about this before, the act of writing those cards out is the very first step in memorizing the words. And so to make a card, we would do on the front, we would do the first 3 pieces of information. Terra is the nominative form, terrae is the genitive form, and then we have the gender. Some students also like to write down what declension it is or what part of speech it is. That's not completely necessary because as we're going to learn, we can look at this entry and tell that it's a noun. We can tell that it's first declension. There are ways to do that we haven't quite learned yet. So if they want to write down a little note that that's a first declension noun, that's fine. And then on the back of the card, you write the definition. Yeah,
and I love that you got Leigh's words here. She said words that end with A endings, and here they are. So you saw the pattern. So now when you go to make your vocabulary cards as the student, Leigh, you're going to go, hey, those were my words. I noticed something important just by looking at the verse and starting with the whole passage first. And then I'm going to review these all week. And my mom and siblings are going to help me. And if we miss them, we're going to just keep cycling the missed ones back through the pack until we get them nailed down.
Mhm.
I
Yeah,
got a
and
question. Why is it standard to put like the F or the M next to terra, terrae instead of on the back?
I think, why would that be standard?
I always
I
thought
think
it
when
was so good.
the gender becomes really, really important. When you see the English definition, we're not concerned with with as much with gender with the English definition. Is that what you were going to say, Jennifer?
Yeah, it helps them make that association between the I and the idea of feminine.
Yeah.
To put those together on the front. Mm-hmm.
And really, a lot of the Latin words, when we think of earth or land, we think of them as being neuter. In English, they're a neuter word. So it's the Latin word that's given a gender of feminine.
Which should
It's a
answer
sign.
a lot of questions about why we do quid et quo the way we do in essentials. We know that that the vast majority of nouns in English are neuter, with the exception of, ships and things and countries. But we do that as practice for here. It's for the pronouns and it's for practice for Latin. So that should help us be excited about that task.
And also at this point in the curriculum, if you're a first year Latin mom, you've never done Latin before with your students, you might be wondering, why is gender so important? In a few lessons, we'll see when we get to adjectives that adjectives have to match the noun they modify in gender, number, and case. And so that's when the gender becomes more and more important. So we'll see that then. That was a great question. Any other questions? Okay, let's move on to task 4. Who remembers what task 4 is? Practice forms. Okay, so task 4 is practice forms, and we're always going to start with a chart, and then we're going to do an activity with a chart. So the chart we're going to look at today is the noun and adjectives chart, and I hope it's big enough that you can see it. The verb chart was hard to expand it enough, but I think with this one you can. So the first thing I would ask all of you, and the first thing you should ask your students, is just, what do you see? So take a look. Raise your hand if you can tell me something you notice. Barb or Babs?
I see some songs that I
You
learned in
do?
foundations, especially at the
Nice.
top.
I don't remember the tunes, or I would sing them to you. There you go. Nice. And AJ?
I think it's Andy.
Andy, I can't see the name.
Yeah,
I just saw.
I know. Trying to help you.
Yeah. Thank you.
That the adjectives have feminine, although it's like following first declension endings, which we know are generally feminine, second declension masculine. You have a separate area for the masculine nouns and adjectives and a separate area for the neuter nouns and adjectives.
Nice. Very good observation. Yeah. And that's why we were able to put the adjectives and the nouns on the same chart. Good. Anybody else?
Well, I'm noticing that singular and plural looks pretty important, and that nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, ablative looks pretty important.
Yeah, good. Every declension chart can fall into those two categories.
And
yeah, great.
See 5 declensions in the gray, and we talked about the first one in our vocabulary.
Yes, very good, very good. So what we don't want is for a student to be overwhelmed by this huge chart. So once they've looked at the whole chart and can point out some things and kind of get a feel for what the chart looks like, then we're going to focus in on just the portion of the chart that we are doing today, which is first declension nouns. So they don't have to memorize all this yet. Eventually, probably by the end of the semester, they'll have most of this chart memorized. So we're just going to focus on first declension nouns. And the first thing I would do is I would recite. I always like to recite down the columns. So, and you just did it with the song so well, Babs. I, autumn, is, as, is. And so we would recite them, then we would write them, we would copy them down. There's other things you can do with charts just to help memorize those. One thing you can do, though, is you can use comparison. So as you look at the first declension nouns, just the first declension chart, do you see anything that's similar in this chart? Any of the endings? Yeah, everybody's nodding. I think you can see some of the endings are actually the same, aren't they?
Yeah, Michelle had her hand up.
Oh, good, Michelle. Thank you. I missed that one.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the genitive, the dative in the singular, and the nominative plural all are the same.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple other ones in there too, but
yeah,
those stand out.
Right. Those three really do stand out, don't they? Once we get into other declensions, we can then use this to compare back to first declension. So next week, in 2 weeks, we'll have the next book club where we go to lesson 3, and we would be looking at second declension masculine and neuter nouns. We could compare those, or we could compare the second declension to the first declension and see if we see any patterns. And that helps us to memorize.
So I have a question. If I only ever learned the first and second declensions, could I read with accuracy? Do you know the percent, like 50% of Latin or 70%? Are they just the most common or not really?
No, actually, third declension is the most common. It's
Third
the biggest bulk. Yeah, third is. So there aren't.
Fourth and
as
fifth
many.
are tiny.
Yeah, fifth is really tiny.
Okay, so I'll rephrase that. If I learned the first 3, I can probably then read 85% of Latin fairly accurately.
Probably, yeah, I would say.
It's actually a guy who did his PhD dissertation on this idea, and he wrote about it in a book called Essential Latin Vocabulary. And you can actually see the numbers of words in each declension if you're curious to know later. That's what he did. He counted things. And this was before AI, so he had to manually count manuscripts.
Backwards, but yeah, that's a good book. Good. Okay, so any other questions or comments? We will move on to an activity. Okay, let's see. All right, so the activity, as you can probably guess for this lesson, is to actually take some of those nouns and put the endings on, and that's called declining. So we're going to decline Latin nouns, and we're going to do it in 2 steps. So the first step is to find the stem by dropping the genitive singular ending. So we've heard enough that Latin is a language of stems and endings. So if you remember your vocabulary entry, you have a nominative terra, you have a genitive terrae, and then of course the gender and the meaning. So if I drop the genitive ending, does anybody remember what the genitive ending was?
AE.
From that chart. AE, right, good. So if I drop the AE, I end up with my stem, which is TERR. So that's my stem. And then my next step is I'm going to add the first declension endings to that stem. And so it would look something like this. So you can see the I, autumn, is, as, is. And now we've put it on the stem, and now we can recite, we can decline terra, we can do the whole thing. So we would say terra, terrae, terrae, terram, terra, terra, terrarum, terris, terras, and terris. Does anybody want to try to recite that? You can just read it. I'm putting you all on the spot today. It's going to continue. Got to make it fun, right?
I'll do it, but I can't roll my R's like you.
I was about to say, I really want to hear Babs roll her R's with her country accent. So this is going to be awesome.
I cannot roll R's. All right. Terra, terrae, terrae, terram, terra, terrae, terrarum, terris, terras, terris.
Very, very good. That was great. And so what are some things that you would do then, anybody can answer this, to help your child practice declining nouns?
Repetition, repetition, repetition.
Excellent. Yes, absolutely. Repetition. And there were a list of 6 nouns in the vocabulary this week. They were all first declension nouns. So you could spread that out over the week and have them write them. You could have them recite them. You could even try giving them a noun that they're not reading, have them do it. Like if I asked you to do aqua, could you decline aqua just on the spot? Maybe, especially if you're looking at the endings. Does anybody want to try that?
Leigh looks like she was trying it.
Yeah, try
I'm
it.
telling you. Aqua, aqua. Aqua, aquarum, aquis, aquas, and aquis. Something I was
very
thinking
good.
about too while I was doing it was, it's always trying to engage the kids in a way that's not textbooksy. And so it's again, tell them just to make up their own syllable and then add the endings to it. It doesn't have to be an English or a Latin word. It could be some from Jabberwocky or a sound the baby makes. Then the second thing I was thinking about, so for auditory learners, that's a good one, was I'm such a visual learner that if I was given like 5 or 6 of these cards with Latin words with the meanings or endings off of them and asked to write them, these 12 endings, a number of times, I can see the card later and remember where my endings are. So even if I'm not fast at it or can't pronounce them correct,
I like doing a mix too in community. So, we read the vocabulary list in task 3, practice vocabulary. And then when I get to the chart, I have them all go around and take a noun. And if I don't have enough nouns for the number of kids in the room, well, we just start back at the top of the list. And if I have too many, we do the rest of them together or I take volunteers. But I think doing that orally in community is a good way to quickly engage them. And it's a good way to go back to the vocabulary list again. But then sometimes, as you said, Leigh, it's super important to write them down at home because that's that step of spelling it as well as hearing it. So we did have a question in the chat from Andy. She says, is there a difference between the diphthong, AE, like Kylum, and the AE ending in first declension?
They're actually the same thing. Sometimes in the Vulgate, when you get your parallel readings, you'll see that they've taken the AE and they've made it into that symbol, the AE pushed together. It's called a ligature. It's like a special symbol. So yeah, you'll see it both ways, but they're the same thing. Good question. I thought of something too. You could take note cards and you could write all your endings out, 1 per card, and then you could throw them out and you could practice just for hands-on learning. You could practice rearranging them on a table, and then you could take, say, terra, you could write TERR as the stem, and you could just hold it next to the first one, terra, and keep moving it down, something like that. Might be fun. That might be fun for younger kids too to do. Good. Lots of ways to practice these. All right. Are we ready for
I'm glad you said that about the younger kids, Kathy. I just want to say this is one really big advantage that we want to keep emphasizing is that you can have your whole family at the table for at least part of the common Latin time. So the younger children who are maybe foundations age only will absolutely adore declining all the nouns in the vocabulary list. That's like a game to them. And so having them stay engaged, and then we understand, right, they might not stay an entire hour while your older students do tasks 5 and 6 maybe, but you can keep your family together for a longer portion of time by thinking about which parts of the lesson you can do together.
I love that idea. Even with essentials, we're working on nouns, and I think we read the definition of a noun in English earlier, so they'll have a lot of input into that. So let's move on to syntax then. Lesson 1, of course, introduces the nominative case. So let's see. The primary role of a let me back up a little bit. I think I skipped ahead. So we had a catechism question that Latin nouns have 4 attributes: declension, gender, number, and case. So as you can expect with lesson 1, there's going to be a lot of definitions. So one of the definitions that we'll focus on is declension. A declension is a family or group of nouns or adjectives. Each declension has its own set of case endings that must be memorized. Applying the different endings to a noun stem is called declining. So my question to you is, does any of that seem unfamiliar or difficult now that we've looked at vocabulary and looked at the chart and declined nouns? It shouldn't, right?
I think it's familiar, but that's not the same as really knowing it. And for someone who's
Exactly.
new, it's like it's going to take time.
I think
Andy
you're
has a
right.
question. Yeah.
Andy,
Yeah.
yes.
I know whenever I first started doing essentials, like I did not understand what decline meant. And so I think seeing instances of it, like maybe not being able to define it exactly, but at least define by comparison.
Yeah, that's good. It's given, declining a noun is giving all the forms of it, right? Which is what we did with terra before. I think I lost my train of thought.
Oh, I'll fill it in for a second, Kathy. So
Yes, please.
one easy way to do it where we have kept it in the English is, of course, our pronouns, which they memorize in foundations. So if they need a comparison, I, you, he, she, it, we, you, they, right? We keep those sort of forms in our pronouns. That
Yeah,
sometimes
absolutely.
helps us English speakers.
Yeah, that's really good. I remember what I was going to say is that as a parent, when you're getting ready to teach the lesson, I would suggest reading through the whole lesson first, because a lot of times, like we see here, there's information in the syntax that is helpful to know or be a little familiar with when you go to do the earlier tasks, like the vocabulary task and the forms task. So you already know that if we get stuck there is a definition of what it means to decline here. So good. Okay, let's go to another portion of the syntax, and that's nominative case. So the primary role of a nominative case noun is to be the subject of the sentence. And we saw that in our verse, terra autem erat ianis et vacua, and the earth was void and empty. And so how do we know terra is nominative case? What do you all think?
The ending.
Yeah, the ending. It ends in that A ending. And we just practiced ah. So that A ending is nominative case. Now, you can also look at the example and you can see where we highlighted terra and highlighted the meaning of it, the earth. So if we looked at that sentence and the earth was void and empty, Jennifer, what's the question we would ask in essentials to find the subject of that sentence?
What was void and empty?
And that's the earth. And so that confirms for us that terra is nominative case and it is the subject. Good. Any other comments on nominative case?
Well, this is
Questions?
making me want to go back to that chart that you had where I pointed out nominative, dative, genitive, accusative, ablative, if I got that right. I almost want to write those 5 words and then the pronouns you just told us to say, Jennifer, and then to the left of them, write, what you're going to have eventually, the subject, the object, the indirect object. I can have just a little chart to help me make that essentials Latin connection.
That's such an excellent idea. We actually put it in this lesson.
Okay.
Yeah,
it is in there. But I'm not hitting every piece of the syntax part of the lesson. Stephanie, you have a question?
I was just going to say too, like for a student who's maybe coming in after having some Henley or a tour 3 student, like they could be looking at that agreement with the subject and the verb. Like, do you see the singular T on a rat? Yeah. How do we know that you can use some more even to solidify the fact that that's the nominative case?
Right. Excellent. Yes. Okay. So now another section of this syntax page says nominative case nouns are also used as predicate nominatives, which are predicate nouns. A predicate nominative follows a linking verb and renames the subject. So Jennifer, that's straight from Essentials, I think, isn't it? That definition.
Yes. And that is one reason why we call it a predicate nominative in Essentials and not a predicate noun, because we are preparing you to know that's in the nominative case when you're in Latin. So
Yeah, what you're going to find as you work through the curriculum is you're going to find that there are other uses for the cases other than what we memorize in the foundation's memory work: nominative, subject, genitive, possessive, dative, indirect object, accusative, direct object, ablative, object of the preposition. So we'll start to see that those cases, some of them have 8 or 10 or 12 different uses. Some of the cases do, and this is the first example of that, because we said on the previous slide that nominative case is primarily used as the subject. Well, here we see that it can also be used as a predicate nominative. And then the example here is from John: ego sum via et veritas et vita. I am the way and the truth and the life. So the way is renaming I. We have a linking verb am, and I don't know what the question is, Jennifer, that you would ask in the analytical task. Do you remember it?
And Linnell might have to help us with the predicate nominative.
Yeah,
I think it may be something simple like is something renaming once you identify the subject.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Good. So then when we look at, we didn't have the word via, and we didn't have the word vita in the vocabulary that I gave you for this book club. But can you look at those endings? You can probably look at those endings and tell that they're both nominative case. And we confirm it with the predicate nominatives in the English.
Yeah.
Any questions about this one? I was wondering if anybody noticed where to toss.
We have a couple of questions.
Yes, we do. Good.
So
I'll go
Beth.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm just curious if the shading over via and the way and vita and the life, is that just for the slide, or is that in the curriculum also?
Great question. It is in the curriculum. So when we give examples in the syntax pages, we always highlight the thing that we're looking for in those sentences, because there's a lot to most of these verses that we don't have time or not ready to explain. So yeah, good question.
I thought I saw another hand, but then I think it went, it's Michelle.
There it is. Yeah, thanks.
So why would veritas not be in the same form as the way and the life as via and vita?
That's a great question. So if you go to your dictionary and you look up veritas, you'll find that it is not a first declension noun. It's actually a third declension noun. And so its form in the dictionary would be veritas, veritatis. So it doesn't have that AE. So that can be a confusing word when we just learned first declension and we learned that the AS ending is an accusative plural in first declension. Well, that's actually not the ending of that word. That's a third declension, which has various endings in the, like somebody said in the chat, various endings in the nominative forms. Good question. I was wondering if you would notice that. And that's why we didn't highlight that one. So if you're analyzing just the English, then you know that we have 3 predicate nominatives in the English sentence. We have the way, the truth, and the life. But veritas is not first declension, so we're not highlighting it. Yeah.
Sorry, Kathy, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I'm sorry.
I think that's what you just did is lovely, because if I have a child at home who asks me that, I'll grab the dictionary. Let's find out.
Mm-hmm.
If I have a child who doesn't ask, I'm not going to be labor, right? So you can stop and answer their question if you have a tool to hand and have that discussion and then come back to the first declension. And those are great rabbit trails for later. You can file that away. Oh, look, it doesn't look like the other ones. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on it today. But I like those little rabbit trails if they ask. You don't have to know every single word on the page.
Right. And if you were sitting with your whole family and you had a second or third or fourth tour student, they might know that because they've done third declension, they've had that word. And so they may have the answer right there for you. Good. Very good. Okay, so we didn't do everything that was on the syntax page for this lesson. That would be a little bit longer. The last thing on the syntax pages that I wanted to point out today is a translation tip that says Latin has no articles. For example, bestia could be translated beast, the beast, or a beast. And translators have to choose which form to use. And so we saw that in the previous example. We saw it being translated as the way, the truth, and the life.
And this is why people, without the context of the whole scripture, there's Bibles where it says Jesus is a way, a truth, and a life. And that leads to cults. That's why we have cults. And so this is why knowing knowing the grammar of language is paramount to correct theology. And when everybody in the United States went to grammar school, whether it was at home or not, and they knew that's what they were studying, they could always use their scriptures like we're doing. So we are repeating what the colonial families would do in order to get not just their theology right, but the grammar that went with their theology. So God says not to make light of small things, and those articles are not a small thing.
That is very, very true.
And that's one reason in Essentials we teach them that the article D is a limiting adjective. That's important for them to know that there is such a thing as a limiting adjective. It is limiting it to a specific beast.
And
the one you can see.
I don't know Greek, but I think they have limiting articles in Greek. I tried to look it up. I think maybe they do, and so it's definitely there. Good. All right. Any other questions before we move on to parse and translate? Don't see any. Good. All right. Let's go there. Okay. So if we remember from last week, parsing and translating for Tour 1 is really copying the Latin. You're going to see so much detail when you copy the Latin. Then copy the English. And then parse only the words you know. So we're only going to know a few words. We've only learned a few first declension nouns, and we remember our verbs from last week, our forms of soon from last week. And then once you've done that, then you compare and to see just what else you can learn, what else you can glean, what else you can discover. So here's our verse written out. I don't think I need to read it again. So by the way, this set of verses was too long to put on the quid quo grid and have you be able to see what we're doing. And so another way you can parse is to just write it on paper. So I like to write it out on paper, and then I'll triple or quadruple the spaces between the Latin so that I have room to write the English and room to put the parsing above and then the meaning of each word below. So we'll work through this together. So let's first, and I'm giving you the chart because we may not have that memorized. I'm just going to put it up here in the corner for you. Okay, so this is in the beginning, God created heaven and the earth was void and empty, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved over the waters. So let's look at just the first line, and let's just look for our nouns first. So who can tell me what they see? Do you find a first declension noun, and can you parse it?
I'm going to do the one I did before. Oh, good. Who was that?
Andy.
Go, Andy.
All right. So terram, it is singular accusative. It means earth.
Very good. Yep. So we would feminine singular accusative, and it means earth. And we can kind of line that up with the English there. Okay, now let's look at the second line. And we'll see who can find one of our nouns. There's only one of our nouns.
Terra. So it's a noun. It's a noun. It's first declension. It's feminine, and it's singular nominative.
Yeah, very good. Earth. Means earth.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Andy, for modeling for me.
Nice. Okay, let's go to the third line. And can you find one of our words? It's not terra this time. Find it and parse it. Go ahead.
So it's aqua. Oh, sorry.
Is that Beth? Go ahead, Beth.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Someone jumped in too. So it's aqua, aquas. That's first. Okay, so we're going to do noun. First declension, accusative, and feminine. Mm-hmm. Singular.
Yeah. Is it singular or plural?
Oh, no, it's plural. You're right.
Yeah. Good. I do find it helpful when you're first working on this to write your endings out. Jot your ending down somewhere on the page, and then you can use that as a reference to confirm. And of course, it means waters. Very good. Okay, so we've found our 3 nouns. Well, really 2 nouns. One was used 2 different ways. Now, from last week, we learned forms of sum. So this will be a little bit harder, but as you scan through, does anybody see a form of sum? Remember, we could have sum est, sumus est, sunt, or eram, eras, erat, eramus, eratus, erant, or ero, ris, erit, rimus, ritus, erant.
Erat.
Erat, very good. It's in the second line. It's the third word. Terra autem erat. And do you remember, what can you remember about parsing that verb from last time?
Third person singular, he, she, it.
Yeah, very good. It's one of our regular verbs, the linking verb, third person singular, and this one is imperfect tense. We really didn't hit imperfect tense hard last week because we just focused on present tense. And we'll say it was. There's another erat in that same line, so we can go ahead and label it the same way. And that's it. We got everything we knew from these 2 verses, and we parsed it. You guys did a great job. So I would ask then, you would ask your student, what other words do you see that you recognize? What else could we talk about just by comparing the English to the Latin?
Well, I want to talk about Tenebrae because when I memorized John 1 in cycle 3, that word was in there like a lot. So that one stood out to me because I know that word.
So what does that one mean based on what you learned from Foundations?
Darkness.
Yep.
And
darkness.
Darkness comprehended it not is what I remember from cycle 3.
Oops, I went ahead. I did not mean to do that. I'm trying to write on the screen. I don't think I'll be able to.
But it must also be one of our words because it ends in AE.
Yeah, it is. Good.
But so is darkness
about
plural? Is darkness plural? Because it's the nominative of the phrase. Darkness was on the face of the earth.
Yeah, I need to check this, Jennifer, and make sure that I have the correct verb there. I may have mistyped it, but that's actually a 2 or 2 word, Tenebrae, and it's a word that is it's only used in the plural in Latin, so it's just the plural only.
There's a lot of it always.
Yeah. So we think of darkness as a single thing, but in Latin, it's all the darknesses together make up the darkness, which is an interesting play on words, isn't it?
Could it be like the collective nouns?
Yes.
Are we studying essentials? Okay.
Yeah. And I did make a mistake typing this in. This should be ERANT. And so this one's actually third person plural because you don't know this yet, but because it's going to agree plural subject. So we need a not plural verb there. And so we would say they were. In Latin, it's like the darknesses were. In English, we use it in the singular. Darkness was.
How do we tell whether is it because I see the dative singular, it's also ending in AE?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sometimes you have to use context since there's 3 endings that could be. You use the context of the verse, and that makes the most sense. And then comparing it to English, we see that darkness is the subject. What was upon the face of the earth? Darkness. So we know that's a subject. So we know that this is a nominative.
And that's why those questions and essentials are helpful, because otherwise, I wouldn't know. I would have to ask the question.
Right. And some of the things we're talking about right now, because we're adults, we have the background, we have some Latin background. These are probably not the questions your children would ask you. So like Jennifer said earlier, you want to keep it simple, but when you want to dig into something, go ahead and do it.
It is interesting to think about darknesses and waters being plural. That's not the normal way we would say that in English either. We took 2 different routes in English as well. We made darkness singular and we made waters plural. And
Yeah.
So, and then I'm remembering from
Go.
Foundation's list of things we memorized. At and at are in here a few times from our conjunction list. So they mean and they're conjunctions.
Mm-hmm. Lots of them, lots of ands. Yeah, good. By the way, do you guys, this is kind of a rabbit trail, but you know the ampersand symbol that I don't think I can draw it very well. It's something like this, the ampersand. That's actually a shorthand for for and. It's supposed to, oh, there you go. Yes. It's supposed to look like an E and a T.
Nice.
Excellent.
I did not know that.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else that you notice or want to point out? And then we will move on.
Okay, I have a question. Would it be okay if your student said, "Can I guess at some words because I see them like it looks like wit looks like created, or in principio maybe could be from what I memorized, John 1 in the beginning." Is it okay to let them just guess? Like, would you look it up to verify it was correct? Like, is that okay for them to do, or are they going too far?
No, they're not going too far. I love it when they guess and try to figure things out. They might be wrong, but I think it's great. I think when they're guessing like that, they're actually thinking, they're reasoning, they're comparing, and drawing on previous memory. So I think that's great. And by the way, in each of the lessons, one verse, or in this case, 2 verses, because the first one's so short, is completely parsed out for you. So every word in these 2 verses is in lesson 1. So we give you one example.
I can remember someone mentioned at the beginning that the word super's in there, and a lot of kids are going to say that because it looks like our English. And so, you can have them compare to the English and say, it means over. And then one of mine said, well, so does that mean Superman is like an overman? And so then we had a little conversation about Superman and where did we get our word super? And then that stuck with them forever because we had that little conversation about super being over. So.
Good.
And if we had translated it was over the face of the D, the student wouldn't be wrong. It's fine.
Right. Yeah, because the Dewey Reams here has translated it upon.
Right.
And that's where
it's over. And the last one, it's over though. It's interesting.
Yeah. That's choices that a translator would make. It's like if we look at 5 different English translations of the Bible, we're going to find different connotations of words that are used. And I think we learn a lot from Scripture by doing that. Yeah. Good. And Andia is asking, is the English going to be translated like this below the Latin in the Common Latin book? So in the lesson, it'll be a quid quo like we saw last week, and it will the single verse will be parsed out. So you'll have the Latin written, you'll have the English written out, you'll have the parsing and each of the words translated. In the parallel readings book, where you are actually into Genesis, it'll be side by side. So you'll have a page on the right will be all the Latin verses, and then you can scan your eye across to the left-hand page, and that'll have the English. So for an older student, for example, they might want to take a piece of paper and cover up the English, try to just read the Latin. The younger students will actually be copying both. Good. Any other questions? These are great today. Michelle.
So I am just starting out in Henley, tutoring Challenge A this year, and I just got done reading in the book that it says that the verbs usually come at the end of the sentence. And I remember you talking about the word order doesn't necessarily matter, but are we like when I see the English below and I see the Latin above, it's like word for word, like in the beginning, God created, I'm sorry, my bird, created the heavens and the earth. Like it's word for word, but typically would the words be laid out in this order for Latin? Am I making sense?
Yeah, you're making sense. I think a lot of the time the verb is at the end of the sentence, especially in classical Latin. In the Vulgate, it's a little simpler, and sometimes the word order is a little closer to what we would do. In this particular sentence, you can see that God, the subject, comes after the verb, which is interesting, right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, our direct objects, our accusative, come over here. Both of these are the accusatives. And one of the things Latin authors will do, or Latin translators, is they can move word order around for emphasis. So the part of the sentence they wanted to emphasize might come at the front of the sentence or at the end of the sentence. And that's one of the reasons the verbs are often at the end, is because they're usually the most important word in the sentence.
And they were much stricter about that in classical Latin than they were when they got to Jerome and beyond. When you get into the medieval, the word order varies a lot more. So
yeah, very
so
good.
these are, so to answer the question, I think you also are asking, and whatever was in the Vulgate is what you see here. So whatever order Jerome had it in, we have not rearranged his word order. This is his word order. We have kept his form exactly. So
that's
thank you. I'd appreciate that.
As you're working with your students in Henley and translating Latin to English, that's, it's important to remember, we may have to go all the way to the end to look for the verb, but if they're translating a sentence from English to Latin and they don't put the verb at the end, that's not wrong. That's just a stylistic thing. Okay, good. All right. I think we've answered everybody's questions. We did have a Q&A, but we're kind of moving Q&A in between each of the tasks. So we'll see if we have any more, and then we'll close out.
And did you say, Kathy, we're off coming back next week? No. What's our schedule?
We are not. Right. The printed schedule on the website, there's no live book club next week. We'll be back on September 2nd. It just has to do with everybody's schedules, and sometimes we have conflicts. So we'll be back next week. Any final thoughts, anybody? All right. Well, Leigh, we can close out then.
So let me just end in prayer, because here we are studying the Vulgate. So Lord, thank you that we do not live in the darkness, that we live in a light that other people don't have. And as we move forth into whatever you have for us, just let our hearts be light toward our neighbor, so that maybe they'll ask us about why we are so light when everything seems so gloomy right now. So help us to ban the Tenebrae. In your name I pray. Amen.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for staying.
Yes.